Okay, so this is going to be a walkthrough through the Speedlight version of Exercise 06. If you don't have a Speedlight, it is still worthwhile looking at how we meter for flash, but you should do the non-Speedlight version for obvious reasons. Okay, so what we're going to do in here, we're going to make sure we set the power of our flash manually. I have this Magic Flash right here. Mine can be wirelessly controlled from my camera. If yours cannot, right, if you have a hot shoe flash, if you have a pop-up flash, then it doesn't count. Go to the other one. If you have a hot shoe flash, but it isn't wireless, right, meaning it has to be attached to your camera, that is fine, right? I would still go ahead and do this exercise, but I would, since you're not going to be able to put the flash on a light stand, put it on your camera, point it out, and have it bounce off of a card, right? So you angle the card toward your subject, you angle your flash away from your subject toward the card, and now this card becomes a larger, more diffuse light source. So that's what you should do if you have the flash that doesn't, that is a hot shoe flash but not wirelessly controlled. If you have a wireless one, right, we would like to put it on a light stand in some way. If you can't put it on a light stand, you can sit it on something, anything where you can sort of control it remotely, position it where you would like. That means gaffers taping it to something, just be careful. Also, you want to be able to have access to the controls. I have this hot shoe adapter mount thingy, which means I can take this, put it on this hot shoe, fasten it down, and then put it on my light stand. Okay, once I've got it on there, tighten it up, and then I can point it at my model. Make sure that you are controlling the output level on your flash manually. We should be able to dial it up and down. Mine can go from a 256th power to full power. Right now it's at 128th, so that's almost all the way down. That's because it's pretty close to my subject, and it's actually also a fairly bright flash, so I'm going to be using it on a pretty low power setting. When we do our initial meter reading, we will adjust that up and down until we get our meter reading somewhere that that we like. In fact, I'm going to start out with a little bit higher, just so that I can adjust it down and sort of show you what happens. Okay, so I now have it at a 16th power, which is not that low. Hey, cat, get out of here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and use my magical meter. You guys should all have, if you have a light meter that can measure flash. If you don't have a light meter that can measure flash, then you basically don't have a light meter that is terribly useful in this scenario. But you should have one that does do flash. If you do have one that does do flash, you are looking for the non-corded option. So on this one, I can hold it up there. I don't think you'll actually be able to see much. So I'm going to take a picture of it and put it over here in the video. You should have a couple of options. You should have your ISO, right, which I've set to the ISO of my camera, in this case 800. I have a sun, that's for continuous lighting. I have a lightning bolt, that's for flash. I have a lightning bolt with letter C, that is for corded flash, meaning that I have connected up this to whatever my flash is so that when I hit the go button, it fires my flash. I don't have that right now, so I need to have it set to the non-corded, so without the C, right? That means when I hit the go button, nothing happens. right? So if I want to meter my flash, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Right, so to meter my flash, I hit the go button on it, right? I'm metering it the same as anything else. I want to see what that key light is, so I'm just measuring that key side. Hit the go button. Oops, flash has to wake up. There we go. And it gives me a thing that says a 30th of a second at f18 and 90%. So what do those numbers mean? So 30th of a second, and actually here, let me take a picture of that so that I can put it in said video. It's like behind the scenes, baby. So 30th of a second, right? That's saying at a 30th of a second, right? So that's my shutter speed. And f18, we would get a good exposure, and it would be 90% of our exposure would be from our flash, right? 90% is from the flash, and the other 10% is from the ambient light. I don't want 10% from my ambient light. And in this exercise, we're not supposed to have a whole bunch of light sources. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my house lights. Okay, and now I'm going to meter it again. So, right, hit the go button, pop the flash, and now it says that same exposure, and a 30th of a second at f18, and now it is at 100% of my exposure is from my flash, right? Because I turned off all this other ambient light. Now, that's fine, but a 30th of a second is still, can you stop making fish faces? 30th of a second is still fairly long exposure, and f18 is a really teeny tiny aperture. I would like my aperture to be bigger. I would like to have shallower depth of field because I'm making a portrait. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down my power on my flash. So I turned it back up to a 16th. I'm going to turn it down to a 128th of a second. All right, so meter, hit the go button. Oh, flash is still asleep. Pop the flash. Okay, now it is saying a 30th of a second at f6.3. Which is, for me, a much better exposure. So what just happened, right? I went in and I said, okay, you were telling me to take a picture at a 30th of a second in f18, right? And that will give me a picture that is 100% flash. If I do that, I will get a good exposure for my flash, but I will be shooting at f18, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to turn down the power on my flash, right? That means that I'm making it all less bright, right? I'm getting less light coming out there. So to compensate for being a lot less bright, I'm going to be opening up my aperture, right? Aperture works with flash the same way that it does with anything else. So now I have my setting at a 30th of a second and f6.3. So let's set my camera to that, 30th of a second and f6.3. I'm going to turn off my house lights. And let's see what we got. I'm sorry, there we go. So we have a picture, that's good. There is good exposure on our subject on the key side. The other side is super duper dark, right? Because we don't really have almost any fill coming back in. I could meter off that side, right, and see, okay, like what am I getting in there? But what I'm really going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and turn on my fill light. I'm using this LED. You could use whatever you want. And make sure that it is blue enough, right? Because our flash is also daylight balanced. So we want to make sure that our fill light is that same color, right? If it wasn't, I could use some blue gel. I could get a daylight balanced light bulb. I could use sort of window light as fill. For this assignment, I could also just be like, sorry, different color. All right, so we've got that up there. I'm going to turn it down a little bit and go ahead and take a picture and see what we get. Okay, so that looks still like almost entirely getting our flash. Let's turn it up a little bit. Okay, so that is a pretty balanced exposure. It is a little bit bright on the fill side, so I can turn that down a little bit. Let's try that again. It's getting better. Now, you could also just meter this instead of fussing around with the camera like an idiot. So if I go ahead and meter on this side, I would need to switch my metering mode back into regular continuous lighting, and I want to essentially match my exposure on the other side, right, which was 30th of a second at f6.3. Okay. So now I'm getting a matching meter reading on both sides. So my ambient and my flash should be roughly even. We will see when I take a picture. And what do we got? So that lighting actually looks pretty good. The white balance seems still a little bit off, right? I feel like I'm getting a warmer light on the fill side. That could just be the color balance of both my light sources. But as of right now, I have a good exposure. So that's awesome. I have now completed part A of my assignment. I don't know that I've gotten the last bit, which is like make the picture pretty looking, but there you go. So that's my good image properly exposed. I'm going to do now the same setup at a 500th of a second. So I'm going to go in here and change. For those of you wondering why my white balance or why my picture is super yellow in this preview, that's because my white balance is set to what my flash is, and my flash is daylight. So my house lights are tungsten. So right now, most of what my camera is seeing is coming from the house lights, and everything is super yellow. So what did I say I was going to do? Set it to a 500th of a second. So there we go, 500th of a second. Up, but it jumped back down to a 200th of a second. Why is that? That's because I have a smart flash, right? It's communicating with my camera. My camera knows that a flash is plugged in, and so it won't go higher than my maximum sync speed. Depending on the flash that you have, you may be able to basically override this and go higher. When you do that, you should then get that like black bar across part of your thing, sort of like inching up from one side of your frame or the other, or actually in most modern cameras from the bottom or the top of the. Okay, well if you're in a portrait orientation, it would be from the sides, but if you're in a landscape orientation, top or bottom. So in this case, mine just says no, I won't go any faster than 200. So that's good. I know my max sync speed, and let's take a picture and see what it looks like. Okay, so we have not changed our flash power. We have not changed our ambient at all. And so what you see is that as our shutter speed went up, right, our ambient exposure went down and our flash exposure stayed the same, right? That's because shutter speed, right? Shutter speed is how we are able to increase or decrease our fill, our ambient exposure, right? Our non-flash light source. And the flash isn't impacted by it because the flash is so incredibly quick. So on that one, let me see if I go back one, right? There is our even exposure, right, at a 30th of a second. Here is our exposure to 200th of a second, where our flash is the same. If you look at the cheek on the right, the lighting level there is the same. Only the lighting level on the left side has shifted because that continuous lighting is now a lot darker. Now the third part is the same setup at half a second. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so here we are at half a second. Kill my house lights, and boom. So what we see now is that with that incredibly long exposure, right, our continuous lighting now has taken over the scene. Right, so if we had a very short exposure, right, that reduced the amount of continuous lighting, our flash became more prominent. When we had a really long exposure, that dragging the shutter means that the continuous lighting becomes much more dominant, right? It gets brighter and brighter and brighter with that longer shutter speed, to the point where now it is essentially overwhelming the entire picture, and everything is super, super overexposed. And if we were to look at it, it's also, we have some movement in there. So there you go. There's part A, B, and C. Don't forget to make a lighting diagram. You can do it with one of those online tools. If you're like, what online tools? Google like online lighting diagram and you will find one. Or you can just draw it on a piece of paper with a pen and take a picture of it and submit it that way, right? We want to have your subject, your lights, positions, angles, height, right? Note which one is key, which one is fill, what they are, yada, yada, yada. And that should be good for exercise 6. Okay, high five. Huh.